So, shalom. I'm Yossef. I teach at Yeshivat Malek Gabah. For those of you I know, hello, and for those of you I don't, actually, I know everybody here, so that's good. I want to speak about the ninth parak of Megillat Esther. In a minute, I'll load up the page we're talking about, but just everybody should be exactly the same point. So we all know the story of Megillat Esther. We all know the ups and the downs. We know the story of Esther being taken to the king's palace after the Hashverosh kills his first wife. We all know that Haman rises to power. We all know the evil decree he does against the Jews. I mean, Asipur Yadua. We all know the story. Well, we also know how it ends. 1 second. Again, Sal, can you turn off your mic?
Yes.
Thank you. And what often by the time the king hangs Haman, we all have this sigh of relief where we say, "Oh, thank God, it worked out. The evil decree has passed." But surprisingly, the story continues, and the continuation we find Esther coming again and begging the king again, and he surprisingly also says, "What do you want? I already gave you everything you actually asked for. Why would you possibly ask for again?" And she says that killing Haman only solved part of the problem because it actually didn't. The decree still exists that all the to kill you on the 13th of the month of Adar. So although you took away the source of the problem, you didn't actually solve the problem, and which the king eventually gives power to Mordechai and themselves, bringing us to the 13th day of Adar, the day of the war, where the Jews actually fought the war against the non-Jews or against the non-Jews that were coming to attack them, succeeding, killing 75,000 people in the process. And after that, Achashverosh again turns to Esther and says, "Okay, but what do you want again?" And she says, "Give me another day for the Jews of Shushan, of the capital Shushan, for them to come and join the war as well." Okay. I'm going to stop 1 second and switch computers. So excuse me a second. Okay, perfect. Now I'm back. So the king allows for her as well, and he gives her another day to the people of Shushan to kill. And what turns out is that the Jews of everywhere else in the world fought on the 13th day of Adar. They rested on the 14th day of Adar. And the Jews of Shushan fought for the 13th day of Adar and the 15th day of Adar, and they rested on the very next day, on the 15th day of Adar. That's where our story. That's where we're up to on our story. And from here now, I'm just going to load up the page I want to read, and we'll start reading from the Megillah itself. We'll just take 1 second to load it up. So I'm reading from verse 16 in front of you. I'll read the Hebrew. The English is in front of you. If you want to read on your phone, we're reading chapter 9, verse 16 in Megillat Esther. ושאר היהודים אשר במדינות המלך נקלו ועמוד על נפשם, ונוח מאויביהם, והרוג בשונאיהם 75,000, ובביזה לא שלחו את ידם. Verse 16 contrast what happens in Shushan. They killed on the second both days. The Jews in the other countries of the king, other provinces, they they fought and protected themselves for one day, and they killed 75,000 people who were attacking them, and they did not lay any hands on the spoil. Pasuk 17, ביום 13 לחודש אדר, ונוח ב-14 בו, ועשו אותו יום משתה ושמחה. And then they fought on the 13th day, and they rested on the 15th day. פסוק י"ח, והיהודים אשר בשושן נקהלו ב-13 בו וב-14 בו. The people of Shushan, they fought on the 13th and the 14th. ונוח ב-15 בו, ועשו אותו יום משתה ושמחה. And פסוק 19, על כן היהודים הפרזים היושבים בערי הפרזות, עושים את יום 14 לחודש אדר, שמחה ומשתה ויום טוב, ומשלוח מנות איש לרעהו. That is why the village Jews who live in the unwalled towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and make it a day of merrymaking, feasting, and a holiday, an occasion for sending gifts to one another. Now, if you notice, I put the psukim in two columns. The right column describes what the Jews of the provinces did, and the left column describes what the Jews in Shushan did. The right column, the Jews in the province, in verse 16, they fought one day, they rested on the 14th, and the left column describes what they did in Shushan. They fought on the 13th and the 14th, and they rested on the 15th. And on that day of rest, they did it Yom Mishteh V'Simcha. But what's surprising is the last cubicle in the left column describes Al Ken. That is why the village Jews, Hayudim HaPerazim, who live in the unwalled towns, they do the 14th day Simcha v'Mishteh and Yom Tov. They make the day of the merrymaking and feasting and a holiday. Now, when did they do this? When is verse 19? So it's clearly not the year that the event happened, because the fact that they rested on the 14th is already described in the verse before. So verse 17 tells us they rested on the 14th day of Adar. What's verse 19 telling us? So clearly verse 19 is saying that they rested, made the day of merriment on the year after that, or the future years after that. So while Pasuk 17 is describing what happened in that year of events, verse 19, Pasuk Yutet, is speaking about what happened in the future. In the future years, the people in the villages continue to celebrate the 14th of Adar. And in contrast, in the left column, there is nothingness. That means that in that very first year, everybody celebrated, albeit in 2 different days. The people of the villages celebrated on the 14th, and the people in the walled cities or in Shushan celebrated on the 15th. That was that first year when Haman was hung. The year after, the right column people, the villages, the unwalled places, continued to celebrate every year. The people on the left, the people of Shushan, did nothing. Now, I didn't notice this. This already, the Ramban, my Nachmanides, in his commentary on the Talmud, he points this out. He uses this fact to say that that's why Chazal instituted 2 separate days of Purim. Some celebrate on the 14th, some celebrate on the 15th, because he said the very second year after the war, already that distinction existed. I'll get back to Nachmanides towards the end of our class, but it's very clear that he's right. That very first year, we have, or the second year, the year after Haman was hung, we have a grassroots minhag emerging. Pasuk Yutet, that is why Hayudim HaPrazim celebrate, osim et Yom 14 lechodesh Adar, Yom Mishteh Simcha. They celebrated. Why? They recognized they went through a miracle, and they decided to commemorate this miracle the year later. They're immortalizing. Now, who told them to do this? No one. Did God tell them? No, there's no prophet.
Sure.
Their prophet telling them? Is there any form of no? It's a grassroots idea. Hayudim Aprazim came up with this idea. In contrast, Hayudim Asher Beshushan did not feel the need. Okay, so our story starts with Purim not being instituted as a holiday, but rather Purim being practiced as a holiday ad hoc by the people of some communities and not all. And now we'll move on. I'm moving on to, we read up to Pasuk Yutet. I'm going to read now Pasuk Kaf, verse 9, 20. ויכתוב מרדכי את הדברים האלה, וישלח ספרים אל כל היהודים, אשר בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש, הקרובים והרחוקים, לקיים עליהם להיות עושים את יום 14 לחודש אדר, ואת יום 15 בו בכל שנה ושנה. כימים אשר נחו בהם היהודים מאויביהם, והחודש אשר נהפך להם מיגון לשמחה ומאבל ליום טוב, לעשות אותם ימי משתה ושמחה, משלוח מנות איש לרעהו ומתנות לאביונים. I read it very, very quickly. The crux of the matter is, Mordechai writes these things, ויכתוב מרדכי את הדברים האלה. Mordechai recorded these events, and he sent letters, dispatches to all the communities, charging them to observe the 14th and 15th day of Adar every year. Now, what's happening here is we have Mordechai instituting a custom as law. Mordechai, as a religious leader, or political religious leader, has the power to now take an idea and make it into law. ויכתוב מרדכי את הדברים האלה. And וישלח ספרים, and he says, אל כל היהודים, אשר בכל מדינות המלך, אחשוורוש, he sends it to all the Jews who are in all the countries, now notice very quick, הקרובים והרחוקים. Near and far. Who's near? Shushan. And at this point, Mordechai says, I am doing two things. First of all, I'm accepting your initiative and I'm legislating it as law. And I am now going to say that all the Jews have to do this, close and far, Shushan or villages. I don't care, walled cities, not walled cities, close, far, Shushan, not Shushan. Everybody has to do this. This is a moment of legislation. But notice, he's slightly changing the legislation because the legislation is לקיים עליהם להיות עושים את יום 14 לחודש אדר ואת יום 15 בו בכל שנה ושנה. He charging them to observe the 14th and the 15th day of Adar every year. Now, his charge isn't identical to what they did. What did they do? The 14th. He's legislating Liot Osim, 14th and 15th. Not or, like we do, and 14th. He wants them to celebrate 2 days, not just 1 day. So Mordechai's changes is twofold. It's no longer grassroots. It's now legislated, and it's not by choice. Everyone has to do it, close and far. And it's not 1 day, rather it's 2 days. But the rest sounds pretty similar. Kayamim asher nachu b'hem hayudim oivhem, just like the days where the Jews rested from their enemies. V'achodesh asher nepach lehem me'agon lesimcha, and the month that changed from sadness to happiness, halavai aleinu, v'me'evel leyom tov, from mourning to happiness, לעשות אותם ימי משתה ושמחה, ומשלוח מנות איש לרעהו מתנות לאביונים. He legislated this, but you notice that he's also expanding not just the amount of people involved, but rather also the timing. It moved from 1 day to 2 days, but actually it's a month. It's a month that ne'epach lehem mi'agon lesimcha. It's a full month. I want to point out one more thing. I put the two columns now are what I called Shlav Aleph, level number 1, and level number 2. The first level is what the Jews did, and level 2, Shlav Shtaim, is what Mordechai did. Notice that it's very, very similar, except what the Jews did was they expected Simcha, Mishteh, V'Yom Tov, Mishloach Manot Ish L'Reu. simcha, happiness, joyfulness. Mishteh, having a feast. Yom Tov, which sounds
What?
like a chag that
Yes,
we
please.
do, a chag that we do
Thank you.
on Pesach or Shavuot. Yom Tov, and Mishloach Manot Ish L'Reu. What Mordechai instituted, he לעשות אותם ימי משתה, שמחה, משלוח מנות איש לרעהו, ומתנות לאביונים. So he adds matanot לאביונים, but he detracts Yom Tov. Perhaps saying that, we're not able to, the Torah can do Yom Tov, we are just mere mortals. We cannot legislate a festival. We can stem like a minor festival. We can make a day of happiness, but we cannot make it a Yom Tov. So although he's very much expanding the grassroots initiative, he's also a little bit minimizing it. Bottom line is Mordechai is excited about the grassroots initiative, but he has a little bit of criticism. Your grassroots initiative wasn't inclusive enough. And if you want to do something, you have to do something that appeals to the entire Jewish nation. The entire nation was saved. The entire nation needs to recognize it and celebrate it. And we need to interact with each other. When you and your grassroots were making Mishloach Manot Ish L'Re'eu, you were really only sending Mishloach Manot to your friends, the people who agree with you. I want it to be a general initiative involving everybody, and therefore it has to recognize that something happened in Shushan as well. And the people of the villages, Haprazim, really were saying, well, you guys don't recognize your miracle. Goodbye. We're not part of the conversation. You're not with us. You're not with us. You're not worried, not against us, but not with us. So therefore, we're not including you. And Mordechai is demanding inclusiveness. And he's expecting everyone to celebrate everyone's miracle. The villages need to celebrate what happened on Shushan by celebrating on the 15th. And the people of Shushan need to celebrate what happened by the villages by celebrating on the 14th. You need to be totally inclusive and include everybody. So again, what Mordechai is doing is legislating a minhag, but doesn't end here. Now, it says, in the next pasuk, וקיבלו היהודים את אשר החלו לעשות, ואת אשר כתב מרדכי עליהם. Now, this is a very a complex sentence. The Jews accordingly assumed, this is Sepharia translation, the Jews accordingly assumed as an obligation that which they had begun to practice and which Mordechai prescribed to them. Which means that the Jews accepted this as a legal law, binding law, but recognizing that this rule really has two roots. The one root is asher echelu la'asot, that which they had begun to practice. And the second root is what Mordechai prescribed for them. Now, what's the meaning of this double layered root? I mean, surely all we should say is the Jews accepted it. In what way are they? This is almost sounding like we're accepting it, but we're expecting what you wrote. We're accepting what you wrote. However, but don't forget, we started this. Now, which way? So now we're expecting some a little bit of a pushback from them, saying we're not totally accepting, but let's see how they do that. And here comes a very long story. כי המן בן המדתה האגגי, המן the son of המדתה, צורר כל היהודים, the foe of all the Jews, חשב על היהודים לעבדם, and he plotted against to destroy the Jews. הפיל פור הוא הגורל להומם ולעבדם. And he cast a poor, a lottery, in order to find out, to crush and exterminate them. ובבואה לפני המלך, אמר, אם בספר ישוב מחשבתו הרעה שחשב על היהודים על ראשו, ותלו אותו ואת בניו על העץ. And when Esther came in front of the king, he commanded, let all his evil deeds come back to haunt him, and him and his sons were hung on the tree, on the stake. על כן קראו לימים האלה פורים על שם הפור. That is why These days are called Purim, named after the poor, the lottery. Al ken, al kol divrei ha'igoret hazot, in view of all the instructions that were said, u'ma ra'u al kacha, u'ma higia alehem, what they experienced and what had befallen them. קיימו וקיבלו היהודים עליהם ועל זרעם ועל כל הנלווים עליהם ולא יעבור, להיות עושים את שני הימים האלה ככתבם וכזמנם בכל שנה ושנה. And the Jews accepted upon themselves and upon their offspring and anybody who's connected to them to do these 2 days as is written, as is prescribed on its time every year. And indeed, הימים האלה נזכרים ונעשים בכל דור ודור, משפחה ומשפחה, מדינה ומדינה, ועיר ועיר, and consequently these days are recalled and observed every year, and the days of Purim will never cease from the Jews, and its memory will not perish from their descendants. Now, I read a lot, and in truth, I read almost too much, because I remind you, the very first pasuk of this section is, the Jews accordingly assumed the obligation that Mordechai wrote. Now, the continuation of acceptance is this pasuk. Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim alehem v'al zaram. They accepted not only about themselves, but also about their offspring and anyone who joins them, that they will do Purim every day. This pasuk is a continuation of the agreement. They agreed to what Mordechai decreed, and they agreed not only upon themselves, but also about future agreements. That's what it should say. And yet, that's not what it does say. We have here a story of Purim. These psukim are a description of the story of Purim.
So, we need to call the exterminator. Why? Because I found, those little,
but I got you.
Sorry.
Three types of.
Wonderful. So I found, remember how in the kitchen we used to have
somebody shut off their.
I think you can mute them. I think you can mute
I
them.
found 2 of them in my bed.
I am not the
So
the host.
Because this is not the first time this has happened.
Rosera, thanks. The story in the middle here is a story of Purim, but why repeat it? Why repeat it? I mean, all you really want to say is that the Jews accepted what Mordechai wrote. So, right, the Jews accepted what Mordechai wrote, and not only they accepted upon themselves, they accepted upon their future generations as well. Why reiterate the story of Purim again? And in truth, that's not what they did. And just look back a second in your mind. Why did they celebrate Purim? Well, that very second year, they celebrated the 14th of Adar. And then Mordechai decrees that they should celebrate the 14th and the 15th of Adar. Why? Why choose those days? What happened on those days? So the answer is clear. We read it 3 times before. That's the day they rested after they won the war. So the impetus for this holiday is the Jews fighting and winning the war against their foes. And the day that they can rest and relax after they won the war is a day of eternal celebration. That was the initiative. And that's what Mordechai decreed. However, when the Jews are now telling us this story, and they're telling us, we'll accept your decree, they're telling us the story of Purim again. Here, I'm highlighting Psukim 24, 25, and 26. They're retelling us the story of Purim. In the retelling of the story of Purim, I'll read it again. Haman ben Hamdata was the foe of all the Jews. He wanted to destroy all the Jews. He threw a lottery to find out when to kill them. And when the idea came in front of the king, or when Esther came and told the king about it, he said, we will hang Haman. And that is why these days are called Purim, because of the lottery. What's mentioned here? Haman, hanging of Haman, and his lottery. What's not mentioned here is the war. There's no mention of the war. There's no mention, and as a result of this, the Jews had to fight against their foes, and with God's help, they succeeded, and then they had a day of rest afterwards. There's no mention of this war here. In fact, when you think about it, we're celebrating this week, Purim. The pasuk tells us, why is a day called Purim? Al Shem Purim, because of the lottery. Now, what a strange way to name a holiday. Why are you naming the holiday Purim? Because our evil foe, when he chose the day to kill us, he used a lottery. And therefore, forever, we're going to call this day the day of lottery. What does that have to do with Purim? What does that have to do with our festival? Our festival is our day that God helped us against our foes. Think about Pesach. Why do we call Pesach Pesach? Because God hovered over our houses and made sure Malach HaMavet didn't come in. It's a day of protection. Why is Purim Purim? Because it's the day of the lottery, which Haman threw, and then it backfired at him. But this is a retelling of the story, and in a sense, it's reframing the story. And I believe that what the people are telling Mordechai is, you want us to celebrate 2 days? Okay. You want us to celebrate together with the people of Shushan? Okay. We're willing to. But we're not willing to celebrate the war with them because we're not on the same page of what happened there. We think we were in grave danger. They clearly don't think we were in grave danger, or they were in grave danger. We felt a need to continue celebrating. They clearly didn't. So if you want to celebrate 2 days, bakasha. But let's find a common ground that we can both agree happened and celebrate that. And everybody agrees there was a problem with Haman, and everybody agrees that there was a nahafochu where Haman, instead of hanging Mordechai, was hung himself. And everybody agrees that the day he chose backfired at him. Let's celebrate that. And notice what they're saying, and notice what they're not saying. We are not celebrating the war. We're not celebrating defeating our foes all over the world. We're celebrating defeating one foe, Haman. If you're willing to do that, we'll sign on. So when קיבלו היהודים את אשר החלו לעשות, ואת אשר כתב מרדכי עליהם, this double-rooted idea, it's really saying, Mordechai, we're not totally accepting what you're saying, because you're asking us to accept the idea that everybody was in the same boat. And we need to celebrate their festival, they need to celebrate our festival, and we're all the same. את זה אנחנו לא מסכימים. You want to celebrate 2 days? B'kasha, we'll celebrate 2 days. But we're going to give it a different idea. And Psukim, Kafdalad, Kafei, Kafav are describing a new idea. And once we'll sign on that, then we're willing to do everything. Generations, every year, Kichtavam v'chizmanam b'chol shana v'shana, and continuously every medina and every mishpacha and every year, everybody will sign on this. We don't know what Mordechai responded. In fact, we don't know exactly what happened next. The only thing I know what happened next is the following pasuk. ותכתוב אסתר המלכה, בת אביחיל, ומרדכי היהודי את כל תוקף לקיים את איגרת פורים הזאת השנית. Mordechai and Esther, and suddenly Esther comes on the scene, and they write a second letter of Purim to confirming with full authority the aforementioned one of Mordechai they drew. Now, you all know, if somebody has to write a second letter reaffirming the first letter, that means that the first letter didn't take. That means although Mordechai wrote a letter, and although the Jews seemingly accepted his decree, apparently in practice it didn't take, because they feel the need to write yet another letter. And in order to have the second letter have more validity, Mordechai brings Esther as a backup. And suddenly it's not Mordechai writing the letter like in the previous letter, but rather, Vatichtov Esther Hamalka bat Avichail Mordechai Yehudi. They're both writing the letter, and perhaps she is writing the letter and he is joining her because it's Vatichtov Esther Malka. Mordechai Yehudi and lekayem, confirming את איגרת הפורים הזאת השנית, confirming with full authority the aforementioned one of Mordechai the Yehudi. And this letter they send again, all over. וישלח ספרים אל כל היהודים, אל 27 ומאה מדינה, מלכות אחשוורוש, דברי שלום ואמת. And they're sending the letters to all over, and with a request. לקיים את, or demand, לקיים את ימי הפורים האלה בזמניהם. You must observe these days of Purim on its proper time. כאשר קיים עליהם מרדכי יהודי ואסתר המלכה, just like Mordechai and Esther decreed, וכאשר קיימו על נפשם ועל זרעם, and just like they accepted to do it. And now notice, divrei hatzomot v'za'akatam. What is the essence of Purim? What is the essence of these days that we are observing? Divrei hatzomot v'za'akatam. We're observing the obligation of the fast and their lamentations. And suddenly, the days of Purim are not Yemei Mishteh v'Simcha. They're not days of celebration. They're not days of rest after the war. They're not days of happiness after Haman, his evil plot has backfired against him. Suddenly, it's Divrei Hatzomot v'Zakatam, the days of fast and lamentation. Now, clearly what it means is we fasted and we cried to God, and he heard us. But about what? Did we fast with Esther for 3 days before she went into the king, and then the king accepted her and he raised his staff to accept her and listen to what she had to say? Is that what we're talking about? Or is it the fast and the lamentations done on the day of the war, when we were fighting, and like we do Ta'anit Esther this coming Thursday in memory of the fasting during the war? What divrei tzomot v'zakatam? What are you referring to? We're celebrating that God heard our plea. Which plea? V'ma'amar Esther kiyam divrei hapurim ha'ele v'nichtam b'sefer. And Esther's ordinance validating these observance of Purim was recorded in a scroll. And the Megillah ends. And suddenly everybody agrees, until today we have Purim, because of this last version. Meaning that we've had 4 attempts. And what I did here in the last page, there are 4 attempts. The grassroots attempt. Let's celebrate. All of us who recognize the miracle, let's celebrate. If you want to make an analogy to Israel 2025, who celebrates Yom Ha'atzmaut and who doesn't? Those who recognize it celebrate, and those who don't. That's a grassroots initiative. Stage 2, Mordechai aims to make it a decree enforcing everyone to recognize everyone's miracle and celebrate it, whether they recognize it or not, and whether they care or not, enforcing everybody to be identical. And that fails. The people say, we do not agree. We will not celebrate with those who don't recognize the miracle we went through. You want to celebrate something else? Let's find a common denominator. The common denominator can be Haman, our foe. And the fact that our foe was beaten, everyone can stand behind that and recognize that as a miracle. Is that good enough? And in a sense, we all do that because we call it the holiday of Purim, Hashem Pur. But it seems from the Megillah that even that didn't stick. Till Esther comes up with yet another suggestion, making the idea wide enough that different people can find different interpretations within it. And what are we celebrating? That we called out to God and he heard our plea. When? I don't know. Everybody can choose in the story of Purim what resonates with them. Do you want to focus on Haman? Focus on Haman. Do you want to focus on the Prazim? You want to focus on their celebrate their foe? They're fighting their foes and killing 75,000 people. Vakasha, find your Purim and celebrate it. And what Esther is doing is widening the net wide enough that it doesn't, in a sense, alienate anybody. And indeed, that is Ma'amar Esther Kiyam Divrei Purim ha'ele v'nichtam b'sefer. These ideas of Purim can indeed be written in the book. Now, Chazal take this last pasuk and they say that this is what allowed also Esther to be fit in to the Tanakh, because there was a debate on whether Esther should be the book of Esther should be included in the Bible, in the Tanakh. And Chazal say that Esther turned to Chazal, to the Sanhedrin, and said, "Kitvuni ledorot, write me in." And they agreed eventually. V'nichtav b'sefer. But what it turns out is what the questioning of the Megillah is because we all know the Shem Hashem is not mentioned in the Megillah. What exactly is a miracle? Is it a man-made miracle or not? Are they Mordechai and Esther part of the Persian king's palace, or are they loyal Jews? What's happening there? There's so many interpretations, and you all heard 100 shirim about it. And the idea is that it can fit into the Tanakh because it can have so many interpretations. And I believe that the Book of Esther is telling us that we recognize that there needs to be enough room for people to come with different interpretations and not necessarily accepting all of them. If I'll just go back to the Ramban I opened with, the Ramban started this whole, his interpretation, which is vastly different than what I spoke about here. But he starts and he says, how is it that we celebrate Purim on 2 different days? How is it that some people celebrate on the 14th of Adar and other people celebrate on the 15th of Adar? What mitzvah do we have that is not inclusive of everybody? And the Ramban, his answer is, it's not inclusive because in that very first year, not everybody agreed. In a sense, what Chazal did was take and said, well, let us cherish these different views. Let us cherish the fact that not everybody sees eye to eye. Let us cherish the fact that people are arguing about even the basic essence of what happened. And let us give room for different types of interpretation. So the Ramban uses it to explain why different communities celebrate different ways. My interpretation of this last pasuk is that that's what allowed Esther's decree to be accepted. The people of the Jewish people accepted Purim because it wasn't forcing one vision down their throat. And with this idea of the end of Perek Tet, hopefully we'll learn to, in our own days today, learn to argue respectfully, realize our different points of view, and realize that we all grow from each other and find common ground that allows us all to, Bezrat Hashem, celebrate together as soon as we can with all the wars coming to a very quick end. Ashiya lekulam Purim Sameach, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll see all of you very soon.